It's Benjie Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction. And on the line with us today, we have Dr. Frank Douglas. And we're going to be discussing his amazing book, Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. Now, it's available for purchase through Amazon as well as BarnesandNoble.com. But if you guys want to gather everything that Dr. Douglas has in store, you have to head on over to his personal website, FrankDouglasBooks.com. There you'll find more information on him, more information on this fantastic narrative, as well as find the hyperlink set up to take you to the purchasing page. So one more time, that's FrankDouglasBooks.com. And listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Douglas here on the line. Now, right there in the title, you know what we're discussing today, all right? There's no beating around the bush. And I am very much looking forward to this discussion because I feel there's a lot happening right now in this country and really in the world. There's a lot of division. And especially when we talk about the concept of race and discrimination, depending on where you fall, you may either admit that it exists and acknowledge the problem that we have here in the United States, or you may just outright dismiss it. And I do want to point out that, listen, it's not so black and white. And I think that's the real reason why I'm looking forward to this discussion, because first and foremost, okay, let's just lay the foundation and absolutely admit that systemic discrimination does exist. And it is a problem in this country. Now, how we go about addressing it is very key. Because given the background of the community that you may come from, listen, pointing it out and stating that it's there is good, and that's a start. But you can't just give up because of the system that's in place, right? That's not doing anybody any good. Now, how do we go about dismantling a system that seems so embedded, right? It's absolutely stitched into the fabric of this country, to the point where a lot of communities may not even be able to see it or even recognize it. And I think that this discussion, what this book represents, is so much bigger than words on a page. All right, people, this is an absolute movement. This is a lifestyle change. And at the end of the day, Dr. Douglas is the expert. He's written the book. He's done the research. He's going to be able to articulate the book much better than I ever could. What I want you to do is sit back, strap in, have your notebooks ready, because the education that is about to be dropped on you within the short confines of this interview is going to be amazing. But especially when you head on over and pick up copies of the book for yourself, the discussions that I can see happening through this is absolutely magnificent, and I'm here for it. Let's invite him here with us. Dr. Douglas, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Benjie, and thank you for that introduction, not just to the book, but to the problem that we're facing, which the book addresses in a small manner.
Absolutely. Well, listen, man, what I tell all my guests when they thank me for an introduction is you started it, okay? You had to lay down this fantastic foundation and set up the roadmap for me to follow. And as I mentioned before, I'm very much looking forward to this. So, Dr. Douglas, let's not waste any time. Let's jump right in. Why did you write this book?
Interestingly enough, I was sitting at the TV looking at Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, and listening to the people on the side pleading with him to stop. And it suddenly occurred to me that there was one individual being killed, George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And as well-meaning as the onlookers were, there was one individual being killed. And that caused me to reflect on my own life experiences, whether in academia or in industry or in the social realm, that whenever I saw discrimination, there was always an aggrieved individual. And invariably, no matter how sympathetic or even empathetic we were, it did not get past the fact that that individual was being harmed.
Dr. Douglas, what is the book about?
The book is in two parts. The first part is important in that it explains, if you like, the methodology. It lays down three principles. One, focus on the individual. The second one is we need to evolve diversity, equity, and inclusion to a new principle, which I call equity, inclusion, and individual engagement, or individual motivation, if you like. Because the way to really determine whether someone is being included, whether someone is being treated equitably, is whether that individual is engaged in the activity, in the company, in the society, in the family, you name it, in the community. If that person is engaged and motivated to be there, that's the metric of whether they feel that they are being included and they're being treated equitably. So that's the second principle. And the third principle is the important one. And you mentioned it, we can't be victims. We have to have a way of dealing with these issues that are affecting us when we are discriminated against. And we have introduced the principle of reframing. And the whole point of reframing is to empower the aggrieved individual to have the type of dialogue that enables for that individual a solution that is productive. So the three things we introduced in the book, the focus on the individual, extending the concept of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, into the principle of equity, inclusion, and individual engagement. And third, using our process, reframing the problem so that the individual is empowered to find a productive solution. The second part of the book are a number of interviews from individuals from several areas, from academia, from the health industry, from government, from the regular industry, a number of individuals whom we have interviewed. We have a particular process by which we conduct the interview. We listen to their story, and then we take them through the reframing process to come up with a solution for their particular issue that is productive. And I will warn you, there are some times when we simply say, after going through this process, the solution actually is not finding a better problem to solve, which is part of the process, but is, and pardon the language, getting the hell out of that situation.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Douglas, what a fantastic segue that you've established, because the next question that I want to go into is the title of your book, Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. Now, you've already started to go into that mentality, right, in reframing. So I want to go in a little bit deeper here. In your opinion, what does reframing mean?
Let me give you an example. When I completed my Ph.D. from Cornell in chemistry, my first job was at Xerox. And for 3 months, I could not get a very good project. And one day, a white young man joined our group. And within 1 week, he was assigned to the hottest project we had going on in research and development at Xerox. And I went to my boss and I asked him again, when am I going to get a good project?
Mm-hmm.
And I got the usual answers. And then a very strange thing happened. I said to him, Steve, think about me not as though I am Frank, but as though I am Bob. And I was astounded. I could see the recognition coming to him in his face. And he said to me, Bob has only been here a week, and I have put him on X project, which was the hottest project. I was so angry. I left his office, ran down to the office of the senior vice president to give him not another example, yet one more example of how I was being discriminated against. Now, years later, I thought about that incident and realized that I had missed something very important. The senior vice president had made it a point of hiring young Black PhDs because at the time there was only one Black PhD in research and development at Xerox. So that summer he hired 3 of us. And what I missed is because he had put himself on the line and hired 3 of us, it was actually probably more important to him that Frank Douglas be successful than it was important to Frank Douglas. So had I gone to him and had I said, Dr. Tribus, could you help my boss find me a good project? I may have retired from Xerox because, 1, that was in his sphere of influence. 2, had he gone to my boss and said, find the man a good project, it would not have been lost on my boss that the senior vice president had come to him with that issue. He would have gotten it solved. And 3, most importantly, the outcome I wanted was to get a good project. It wasn't for the senior vice president to go and have tough words with my boss. I just wanted a good project. And so had I reframed my question and asked him to help my boss to get me a good project, I would have received my outcome. And so the whole point of reframing is focusing on what is the outcome you want, and going through a process which we have in the book to help you find what is the reframed problem you should address to get to that outcome.
I love it. I absolutely love it. People, again, we're here on the line with Dr. Frank Douglas. We're discussing his amazing book, Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. Available for purchase through Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, but make sure you head on over to his personal site, FrankDouglasBooks.com, to gather more on what he has in store. Next question that I'd love to get into, Dr. Douglas, and really a key one for me. I noticed that your book, you talk about systemic discrimination and not systemic racism. Can you explain to our listening audience why one and not the other?
We have had recently, sadly, the Tyree Nichols murder. Mm-hmm. And I think when you compare that with the George Floyd murder, you begin to recognize, and one can argue forcibly and not incorrectly, that racism was involved in the Tyree Nichols case. But we didn't see the issue there. It was not white cops, as in the case of George Floyd. It was black cops. It was the same race. And when you think about it, and you see what is happening today, we not only have attacks. You see, the governor of Florida, he's not only attacking black history, black people, he's also attacking LGBTQ+.
Right.
So discrimination, we are aware. Women have been discriminated against in the workplace. We are aware that people of different gender orientation are being discriminated against. People of different color, black and brown, and the indigenous people are being discriminated against. Religious. You remember very distinctly, 6 years ago, the previous president waging a war on Muslims.
Yeah.
So discrimination is broad, and it has to do with when individuals or groups are in power positions and choose, for whatever reason, whether they're fear that they will lose it or whatever the reason, they choose to take advantage of those with less power, those who are vulnerable. And discrimination has been around from time immemorial. And so I focus on discrimination because what drives the behavior is the same, whether it is against brown and black people, indigenous people, whether it's against women, whether it is against LGBTQ, the behavior that drives it is the same. A group of people who presently have power, who fear they may lose that power, and who then behave in ways to oppress those whom they basically fear.
Dr. Douglas, next question here. In your book, you describe an encounter that you had with the police. I think it would be important to really go in depth with that. Can you articulate that to our listening audience and describe that experience?
The reason I actually mentioned it in the book, and now it is with the Tyree Nichols case, although mine was absolutely nothing close to that. So please, let me say immediately, I'm not comparing it with the Tyree Nichols case. So please, I well up every time I see those images of Tyree Nichols. So please. But the reason why I mention it in the book is I was having a conversation with a white female colleague of mine that I have known for many years. And she made the comment to me that she cannot understand why black men run when they see the police and they've been stopped by the police. And she said, they must have done something wrong. And I said, okay, let me give you an example that's happened to me not so long ago. Now, as you know, I'm over 70, and the following happened. I am coming home after dinner with a colleague. I get to my gate. It's a gated community, and I see 3 cop cars in the parking lot, which was sort of unusual. I live in a upscale condominium, which is right on the beach. So, it's unusual to see cop cars there. I slowly come in, and it suddenly became clear to me they actually were parked around where my parking spot was. I pulled into my parking spot, and 6 cops got out from their 3 cars, came around the car. I rolled down the window, and one of them said to me, "You left the scene of an accident." I said, I was at dinner. It's 2 miles away from here. I was not in an accident. And he demanded I come out of the car. I stepped out of the car, stepped out carefully and away from him. And I looked up at the windows in the condominium complex, hoping to see neighbors at the window observing what was going on. This was about 9 o'clock at night, so it was sort of dark. And just hoping that there were witnesses there. And to my great disappointment, I did not see any faces. They began examining the car, and they had their flashlights out, examining the car, and one suddenly said, "Here's a big smudge on the bumper." And I said, "Well, actually, I got the car back today. It's been treated to protect it from the sand, etc. And if you were to rub your hand anywhere on the car, it's not quite dry, you will see the same smudges." Mm-hmm. Another one of them did and said yes. They then discussed with each other. Then they came to me and said, okay, must be a mistake. They got in their cars and they left. Now, during that time, and here I was, over 70 years of age, during that time, the fight and flight fear was in me. And I was doing everything I could, okay, not to succumb to the fear or a feeling that I had to flee from this encounter. And my colleague, after I said that, said, well, it must have been an accident. And it became very clear to me, as I say in the book, because I consider her a good person. It was so clear to me that she either could not or chose not to walk in my shoes to experience what I could have been experiencing during that encounter. And so I concluded, it is not that good people do nothing. It is actually that good people feel nothing, because she chose not or could not feel what I was experiencing in that encounter.
Wow. Dr. Douglas, hearing you talk about that experience as a black man myself raised in this country, you're talking about that fight or flight response. And so many people that I know from communities that I was raised in, myself included, have similar feelings. I mean, listen, even driving by a police officer, knowing that I am totally fine, everything that I'm doing is well within a legal right of my own, you still have that emotion, that fear that comes up. As unfortunate as it is a part of life, right? It is a part of our community. Now, I think that is going into a deeper issue here. So I want to go into the next question, because I think it's interesting that you wrote this book, based upon your words. You say you wrote this book because of the murder of George Floyd. And also, throughout a number of times here in this interview, you've mentioned Tyre Nichols. So it's also very timely that this book is being launched around his unfortunate death. Can you talk to us about the reaction that both men had to being confronted?
No, it's interesting because I was able to sit at the TV and see a fair amount of the George Floyd incident. Mm-hmm. And one thing which I will never forget is they're pushing him into this small car. And he's a basketball player. He's a big guy.
Right.
And his saying, I'm claustrophobic, and fighting to get out of that. And anyone who suffers from claustrophobia will know if there's any time the fight or flight fear arises, is when you have claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. And so here he was explaining to them, just let him out of the car. He will sit quietly on the side, whatever. Put the handcuffs on. He cannot sit in that small car in the back seat where they were pushing him, because he was claustrophobic. And that image I will never forget. And as I looked at the incident with Tyre Nichols, an incident I will not forget. There are two incidents. One, they pull him out of the car and they're beating on him, and he's saying, what did I do? Okay, what did I do? And he's saying very simply, okay, I'll be fine. Just tell me what I did. And then after they capture him as he's trying to run home, the safety to his mother home, they catch him, 80 yards or so before he arrives to safety and beat him to death. And then, although he's dying, they sit him up against the car as though nothing is happening and he's fine. And the emergency comes and they do nothing. He is fine. And those two images, the one from George Floyd, the one from Tyre Nichols, I will never forget, because they encapture two things. They encapture, on the one hand, No one will listen to a black man when he explains, I have a medical condition. I will just take me out of this car. I will sit on the side, put on the handcuffs. I'm not going to fight. No one listens. No one listens to Tyree Nichols, who's on the ground being pummeled, who says, what did I do wrong? Okay, I'm not going to fight. Okay, just stop beating on me.
Right.
No one listens to a black man in that situation. And so one has to ask oneself, what is it within individuals who are at that point imbued in their minds with power that they will take advantage and kill a defenseless human being, a defenseless black man? What is it that is within them? And this is why I say it's not that they're not doing good things, is that they do not feel. And I think very candidly that what we're looking at when we see the behavior of some of the individuals in Congress and the behavior of a Governor DeSantis, etc., is that fundamentally they have lost something very important that is human, and that is how to feel what another is experiencing. They have lost that capacity.
Talk to us about some of the mental health issues that minorities and people from those communities can experience from systemic discrimination.
It's interesting that you ask that, because that's one of the things that really struck me during these interviews. In fact, all but two of the interviewees said the following, that for years and even now, they feel like they are having PTSD-like symptoms.
Wow. And
that led me to coin the phrase, or to coin the symptom, if you like, which I'm calling organizational cultural stress disorder syndrome, OCSD, organizational cultural stress disorder syndrome. And why cultural is because you will see in the book, as you have seen in the book, I describe a number of cultures within organizations that can be psychologically safe or unsafe for the employees in those organizations. And, the people we interviewed covered a wide range of disciplines. They came from industry, from academia, from government. A couple were physicians. And so it was alarming to me when they said that. And I even propose in the book that we probably need to pay more attention to the impact of continuous systemic discrimination, the impact it has on the mental health of individuals.
Last question here for you. Dr. Douglas, we know that many books have and continue to be written on diversity and inclusion. Well, I don't think there's any denying that there has been a resistance of sorts in this country when it comes to dealing with these issues. So we want to hear it directly from your mouth. Why should the audience buy this book?
Well, I think the reason they should buy it there are probably 3 or 4 reasons. Let me put it this way. The first I would cite, which again was very hopeful to me and pleasing to hear it, but a surprise, when a number of the interviewees said, this method that you're using can be used for other problems, not just systemic discrimination. And in fact, I think they're right. You find that this methodology that we are suggesting, can be used in other areas. Secondly, it addresses discrimination in several areas, not just in racism. It addresses gender. It addresses ethnicity. It addresses religious, LGBTQ+. So it addresses discrimination wherever it occurs. And I think the final reason why individuals should buy this book is that it will give them an opportunity to step back and look at the experiences they're having and see a method in which they can be empowered to have the dialogue they need to have with the oppressor, be that oppressor a supervisor, a manager, be it a member in the community, etc.
People, I love the discussion that we just had for so many reasons. But here's one thing that I love even more is that we've barely scratched the surface. Okay, we have just begun. You know what you got to do. Amazon and Barnes & Noble, frankdouglasbooks.com. Those are the places you got to go. Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem is the title you have to pick up. And listen, I'm going to say that again, by reframing the problem. That is so key to all of this, right? In the perception that we take. Dr. Frank L. Douglas is the person you have to thank for bringing it to your table. Head on over there today. Pick up your copies. Let's start the discussion, people. Let's start the education. Because once we start to do that, and I don't know, maybe it's just the optimist in me, but once we start to have those tough discussions and constructive discussions, okay, let's make sure that we put that out there. We want effective communication here, okay? We can move forward in a very productive manner. And through that effective communication, we can start to dismantle some of these issues. Again, maybe it's the optimist in me, but I firmly believe that. Head on over there today, pick up your copies. You can thank me later. Dr. Douglas, this has been an absolute pleasure. Such an honor. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share what we have been doing in a small way, and we really not only we think, we are convinced that as your listeners pick up this book and begin to practice it, they will get much benefit. And we are available to help individuals or to help organizations in training them how to use the methodology.
A new version of Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem. Until You Walk in My Shoes, a reframing methodology to overcome systemic discrimination by Dr. Frank L. Douglas.
Jack Canfield, co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series and the book, The Success Principles. I think it's a brilliant book. I really strongly encourage it. Everyone to read it. It's great if you're an aggrieved person. I want you to read it. And if you're someone who is managing a company or a division of a company, I think it's really important at this time in history to read the book.
Don't miss this powerful and eye-opening exploration of the path to change. Until You Walk in My Shoes by Dr. Frank L. Douglas. Coming soon.